quickly about the portrayal of arms dealers. It's something John Le Carré has written about many times. I have to say, I've met a couple of arms dealers over the years, and they were exactly like Sandy. And they're terribly charming, terribly well educated. You think, you do what for a living? Yeah. And I'm just wondering, what was John Le Carré's kind of background in writing about these kinds of characters, his fascination, and indeed how far you could research those roles?
Well, I think, the book originally, obviously, had been written 20-something years before, and actually came out of a very real context, which was the Iran-Contra scandal and Oliver North's sort of involvement back in those days, for those of you old enough to remember. So at the time that he was writing, he did spend a lot of time with arms dealers and also people whose theoretical job was to suppress arms dealing, even in practice. If in practice they were often supporting it.
And what about in terms of developing the character?
Did
you chat to people at BAE?
I didn't. Well, actually, weirdly enough, many years ago, my dad, he was a pilot in the Air Force, and he travelled a lot around the world, and came across some quite interesting people. And there was one guy who became a really good friend of my dad's. He used to come over and we used to have Sunday lunch, him and his wife. And he was brilliantly entertaining. Really, really lovely guy. I forget where he was from. He wasn't a Brit, but anyway. He was fantastic, really fantastically good company. And it was only years later that my dad told me that he was an arms dealer. Legit arms dealer. And he was, I mean, Great Britain is a legit arms dealer. To Saudi Arabia, as we know, and I'm sure various other places. But and he sold guns. But there was a sort of a disconnect between the job that he did and what it led on to, and this human being. Because I think the challenge when you're playing someone like that is actually you start not with necessarily what they do. You start with the basics. So you start with you build their backstory, because they're human beings. You're not playing, you represent something, of course, but you are playing a human being, and you have to find I stopped to use the word humanity, but humanity within these people. Otherwise, they don't really live and breathe, because these people eat breakfast, they have lunch, they sleep, they have a sense of humour, they have all of these things. And then if you can take that on board, then you start to build in, layer in everything else.
When this book was written, when was it set? Remind us, the actual book.
It was set in 1992.
So the decision, Susanne, then to make it, was there ever a consideration of keeping it in the period, and how did you adapt it to setting it in the Arab Spring?
David Farr, who wrote the script, had suggested to John Le Carré and to the producers that they set it in present time. And when I got involved, I was extremely happy that it was set in present time, because it took away the filter that there's always is in if it's period. And also it's such a timely story that it seemed very right to put it in present time.
And crucially, the changes that were made, notably to the Olivia Colman character, that is you, isn't it?
No, it's not me.
No? I mean, I'm not trying to give her all the credit, but it was a lovely piece of casting, and it's a significant change,
the casting is me, but on my first conversation with Stephen Garrett, he said that because it was set in present time, they wanted the world to be slightly more diverse than it would have been had it been 93. And they were wondering which character could turn into a woman, and they were considering the character of Bier. And I saw my chance to cast Olivia Colman, who I had seen in Tyrannosus and had been wanting to work with ever since.
Excellent. Tom, how did you approach the part? Because you did think about it carefully. You wrote a big feature for the Radio Times about the role.
Yeah. I wanted to play the part on the basis of the first episode. That was all I read and was sent to me initially. Because it was so tightly constructed and so brilliantly plotted, and seemed to be a espionage thriller, but also a discussion about identity, about Englishness, and the character was so appealing. He was a lost soul in search of a cause. And I then went to the book, and I have this still, I may have mentioned this to people before, but it's worth repeating. in the opening paragraph of the third chapter of the novel, Jonathan Pine is described as a graduate of a rainy archipelago of orphanages, foster homes, half-mothers and cadet units, a sometime Army Wolf child in a special unit, a chef, caterer, itinerant hotelier, perpetual escapee from emotional entanglement, collector of other people's languages, self-exiled creature of the night, and sailor without a destination. And as an actor, when you have a piece of character description like that, that was really, how do I give flesh and bone to that soul? That was my diving board from which I jumped.
Fantastic. Alastair, what about for you? So I think you had a story about when you first read the script, you weren't sure you thought it would get made.
I was going to say, my decision was based on the fact that I get to wear nice clothes. Because all my clothes genuinely come from work. It's great. I usually steal them. I shouldn't say that to our producer. Well, I read it. I mean, I got sent sort of this was later than Tom, and I read the sort of the set pieces. You start to read the set pieces, and it talks about sort of speedboats racing each other, and the helicopter flies over this vast estate belonging to Richard Roper, and you kind of think, BBC. No. And we did, due to the kind of mastery of the BBC that supported it, but also AMC in America, and how they managed to pull all that together to sort of make this piece live and breathe, not only in terms of, as Tom mentioned, sort of the plots and the characters, but also the scale which the story deserved, to do justice to the scale. And that's very demanding now, I think, in television, high-end TV. There's a lot of stuff out there. So to make something stand out and be unique, it demands a certain, budget, really, to make it happen. I mean, obviously, blessed with the talents of Tom and Hugh as our sort of glorious on-screen leaders, that kind of investment was made. And so we were very lucky in that regard. But I did think, really, BBC? Can they manage that? And by God, did they ever? With help, obviously, but they certainly did. But scale was key as well.
The story is about being drawn into the world of lavishness. Pine needs to be seduced by Richard Roper's extremely wealthy world. You cannot do that on a dime. I mean, you cannot do that without it being really attractive and magical. And so, for me, it was crucial. The most crucial decision, other than the cast, was actually finding Richard Roper's villa, because I was not going to commit to any other location until we found that location, because that was going to set the bar for the world we was entering.
Excellent.
I think it's about
Tom and then Simon.
Sorry, Simon. Really, this is wanting to champion the crew here. Is they make it look more expensive than it is, and because for example, the Swiss hotel in episode 1. All the interiors of the hotel were shot in Kent, and people don't know that. They think it's all this magical alpine location in Zermatt. We were only in Zermatt for the exteriors on the train, and when Hugh and I are staring at the stars. But inside it, we were actually, this is production designers, set dressers, property masters, people making it look a certain way. And I think that's just a testament to the impeccable craftsmanship of the people.
Well, also, in the script, it was Zurich, and it wasn't Zermatt.
That's right, yeah.
And so there was also a decision made in terms of adding a distinct visual, because Zurich is like any big flat city with a lake. It's beautiful, but it's not going to look stunning the way the Matterhorn looks, and so it was also kind of making decision which had a very distinct visual character.
What were you going to add, Simon?
Only that when we finally found the location in Mallorca, I think I'm right in saying that the script was originally set in Greece, Roper's lair, and we actually rewrote the script around the location, which is the other thing that we were lucky enough to have time to do.
And then use Mallorca to double as other places as well, and Morocco.
Yes.
So the series.
Don't
I think,
reveal everything, Tom.
Okay. I thought this was called The Secrets of Le Carré. So.
But I will say one other,
a
just
big
to add to
secret.
I'm gonna tell you
the
some
production
secrets.
thing was also the private jet as well. So the interior private jet was basically a
Don't
massive.
say that.
It's a massive cardboard loo roll, basically, because it's the right shape.
It was a real private jet.
And then there was this great moment where I was lying asleep on the thing, and they needed to get. Susanne had this brilliant. She said, "The shot I want is basically just we'll get a sort of close up of our lying there. He's got his sunglasses on and he's dozing. We'll get the sun just going. And how do we get the sun? So they just had a guy with a light walking past the window, just doing that over my face. So all the money's on screen.
Alastair.
Sorry, secrets
And we were
revealed.
drinking champagne all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
Hugh Laurie, who's such a fascinating role for him, he's an interesting adversary in this whole thing for you, Tom, because his part draws on our knowledge of his kind of comic side, and his real-life charm. And you're sort of on different sides of a mirror, aren't you?
Well, I think his
actors and
casting is a
characters.
piece of genius. It helps that The Night Manager is Hugh Laurie's favourite novel. But also there is something that his presence in the mind of the audience we all love him so much, and he's already done so much great work as an actor in his life. And what his casting does is it presents a conflict and duality in the mind of the audience because we like him. He's so charming, he's funny, he keeps good company, he looks after his family and his people. And yet he is doing something so deeply wrong with such a disconnect, which is that the beautiful life he lives, the money that pays for that restaurant and those speedboats and the private jets is paid for in the blood of people who die from exposure to sarin gas. And that I think is what's so beautiful about what he does in this is he says, I'm Hugh Laurie. Well, he doesn't say that, but there's a lot that he brings. He's so affable and so likable. And I think it creates this conflict for everybody and for Pine, that you like this man and yet he is doing the worst thing imaginable. In the script, I remember, it was a short paragraph that said something like, Pine, some neighbouring diners are disgruntled by the activity. Pine settles their nerves with a charm. Roper notices and smiles admiringly. It's quite short, really. But I don't know if John Le Carré had read that paragraph in the screenplay. So he took direction, which was that this whole scene in front of him was appalling and disturbing. And when I approached the table to say, I'm terribly sorry about all the commotion, is there anything I can do? He refused to be settled. And it, like a great actor, was forcing me to try harder to achieve my objective, which I almost didn't achieve, I have to say. I kept saying to Susanna, what can I do to make this, I know this can't go on for too long. And
so in the end, I had to tell John Le Carré, even if you don't agree, you actually have to say, you have to accept it.
Yeah. It was sort of, the improvisation would go on. I would say, I'm terribly sorry about all the commotion. Is there anything I can do? I think you should apologise to that woman. I absolutely will, sir. Well, what are you going to do about him? He seems very upset. He is very upset, and don't worry, I've taken care of everything. I'll make sure that everything is handled. He'll be fine. Well, he doesn't look fine.
All the while, we're on the other table.
Yeah.
We're on coffee and mince by this stage. We're just watching this all play out, laughing like drains. Poor Tom struggling.
You know, trust me, he is fine. Let me settle the bill. Can I buy a bottle of champagne? Well, I think this is very disturbing.
It was very, very funny.
Yeah.
And
But it was amazing. I still can't believe it watching it, to be in a scene with him. It was a remarkable thing, an honour for all of us that day. Yeah.
Even taking that moment on, it's a fascinating scene for your character, Tom, and very different to the kind of sort of agent heroes that I think we're used to seeing on screen, because your role there is, you have to be a smoother over, in a way it could almost be quite humiliating, and yet it's central to your heroism, is that you can pull this off. And I would say, I could never imagine a scene where James Bond would ever do something like that. Is there a precedent you drew on, or is it just working out how your character would think?
It was really, I found it, the whole character for me, was an exploration of the malleability of identity. The idea that somehow there is something blank and broken about Jonathan Pine, which is very unique to him, and something is sublimated or repressed from his military service, from his tragic love affair with Sophie, and that all of this grief has been coiled up inside him for so long, and he's been hiding. That's why he's a night manager. He hides behind the uniform, he hides behind the cover of darkness, literally, and he doesn't really have a character except for whatever moral compunction lies within him that Olivia Colman latches onto and says, come and do something right, come and do the right thing. And what Susanne and I talked about was the idea that there is, and it's in the script in episode 2, Olivia says there's half a psychopath lurking in there. And what I think Burr is referring to is the part of Pine that is able to slide between different personas.
Well, can I just say, I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking about all those terrible cases of those police officers who went undercover and had long-term sexual relationships with those environmental protesters, which has all emerged in the last couple of years. The idea that your character could be that person if you chose to be.
I think it's part of the necessity of his success in the operation is he has to embrace that side of himself. He has to embrace the side of himself which understands and recognizes that he actually is quite like Roper, and that they share a frame of reference, and that he can live in that world quite comfortably, even though there is a question mark right at the center of him, which is a moral question. And I think that is what separates the two of them, is that they're looking into a mirror. Roper could be Pine's father, Pine could be Roper's son in some ways, but they are divided by a red line, which is about moral rectitude.